Thank you for joining us for today's roundtable on naval cooperation between France, Italy, and the United Kingdom. My name is Lieutenant Commander Sean Margot. I'm a U.S. naval officer embedded at the French Navy's Center for Strategic Studies, and it's a pleasure to moderate today's discussion. Over the next hour and a half, we will explore the topics of operational cooperation, the European threat environment, lessons from current events, and perspectives on future naval trends, and more. Let me begin by introducing our panelists. Dr. Nicolas Mazzucchi, the Director of Strategy and War Games at the Centre des Études Stratégiques de la Marine, the French Navy's think tank here in Paris. Dr. Francesco Zampieri, the Director of Research at the Italian Navy's Centre for Military Maritime Studies, and Dr. Kevin Rowlands, the Journal Editor at the Royal United Services Institute and former head of the Royal Navy Strategic Studies Center. We will begin with a short video recorded just a few days ago aboard the French aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle, featuring remarks from her commanding officer, Rear Admiral de Possès. This will be immediately followed by our panel discussion, and we will conclude with about 30 minutes reserved for questions from the audience.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Thibault de Possès. I'm the Rear Admiral Commanding Officer of the Carrier Strike Group, the French Carrier Strike Group, gathered around Charles de Gaulle. And we are deployed now since the end of January, first in the North Atlantic area, and then now in the Mediterranean. I would like to talk and take a few moments of yours to talk about the cooperation between Italy and France and UK in matters of carrier strike groups. Just to highlight that nowadays it's not just a matter of exercising together, it's about building power, naval power together. Since we left Toulon, we worked with the Dauntless and we worked with the Doria during the exercise Orion 26. It was a very good way to improve the way we are fighting together at sea. We make a WASEX, which is a war at sea exercise with them. The goal of it is to demonstrate our ability and to train the way we fight with them. And we did it very seamlessly with our allies during that exercise. These drills are no longer just about demonstrating solidarity. They are about preparing for high-intensity naval combat against peer competitors who seek to challenge our control of the maritime domain. Since we have redeployed in the Eastern Mediterranean, we are still working with our Italian friends and our UK friends. So Martinengo and Doria are in the group, and we will very soon work with HMS Dragon, who is coming in the Eastern Mediterranean, and the Lyme Bay as well. Our mission here is all about deterrence and protection of both NATO and Cyprus. And we are working in this complex environment. We are working with all neighboring nations just to make sure that deterrence is enforced around the carrier. Whether the carrier strike group are working alone or whether they're working one after the other in the area from the North Sea and the Norwegian Sea down to the Mediterranean, or from the Atlantic east to the Indo-Pacific, they're producing a very great strategic effect. For example, when you have the UK Carrier Strike Group deployed in the Norwegian Sea, and when you have the French Carrier Strike Group deployed 2 or 3 years after in the Norwegian Sea, you are producing an effect on our competitors as well. We are showing that competing on sea control will be very difficult for our competitors to do. And so this is what we are trying to achieve with the UK's Carrier Strike Group, with the Cavour, the Italian Carrier Strike Group, and with the French Carrier Strike Group indeed. For example, very soon we will be able to exercise and demonstrate our willingness and our power in the Mediterranean, along with NATO, Strike for NATO headquarters, producing effect in the south of Europe. And we will do that at the same time with the Cavour. This partnership embodies European strategic autonomy. Carrier strike groups are unique in Europe. They can operate without access to land bases, protecting powers thousands nautical miles away. The French, Italian and British capabilities come together through the deployment of a carrier strike group, whether through European Carrier Interoperability Initiative or NATO's Maritime Command frameworks. It becomes a force for the entire continent, capable of deterring crises before they reach our shores. This is what Europeans ramp up is about. It is a way for us to build trust among us, to improve interoperability, to share procedures, and to know each other and to be more stronger together. We will see, in the future, we will see the return of naval combat. You were used to see carrier strike groups striking from the sea to the shore. Nowadays, we see peer competitors building blue ocean navy. And probably in the future, they will dispute us our superiority in the sea control area. This is why we are training together with other carrier strike groups to maintain our superiority at sea and to train together just to make sure that we keep this advantage of controlling the sea from the ocean. As a conclusion, I would like to leave you with this thought. If the 20th century was defined by land battles and Cold War standoff, the 21st century will be shaped by maritime and air dominance. The question is not whether France, Italy and the UK will cooperate. We already are. The question is, how do we deepen this cooperation, expand it to a new area and domains like drone warfare, an AI-driven command system, sea-proven data-centric warfare, hybrid warfare? And how do we ensure that it keeps pace with the threats we face from the Baltic to the Strait of Hormuz? The challenges ahead are not British, Italian or French, they are definitely European, and we have to face them. Thank you for your attention.
So I'd like to start our panel by returning to the video's concluding question. In the 21st century, defined by maritime and air dominance, how can we deepen cooperation and expand into new domains? Dr. Mizuki, could you please start us off, focusing first on cooperation in carrier strike group operations before broadening to other domains?
Yeah. Many thanks, Chen, and we're very lucky to have this video from Rear Admiral de Possès that is setting the scene, and that's highlighting the importance of this panel, because here we are the three European navies that are carrier strike group equipped navies, and as mentioned, what's very interesting is that we're strengthening our interoperability, and some of our national capabilities are more or less the same. If you're thinking about air defense frigates, we have a common model between French and Italian, and the British Type 45 is very close to what the horizon is. And in the same time, we have also very different capabilities, because with the French, for example, we're only having a K-Tobar aircraft carrier, we're not F-35 equipped, and we're having a different perspective, different orientation on the use of aircraft, for example. And in the end, having common or very close capabilities and also very different at the same time, we're able to create this interoperability, to continue developing the ability to propose a permanent deployment of European carrier strike group in the zones in which it's useful. As Rear Admiral de Possès mentioned, carrier strike group are very useful not only for a navy or a maritime perspective, they have a very strategic level effect too, because when you're thinking on what a carrier strike group is able to achieve, is able to project power, is able to project an area of air-sea hyper superiority everywhere in the planet. So thinking about facing a competitor, deterring a competitor, or creating strategic dilemmas to a competitor. If somebody is willing to act on a specific land point to push forward on a specific geographical area using carrier strike group, you can pose a strategic dilemma on the other side of this country, in another ocean, in creating overstretching military deployment from this competitor and being able to exert deterrence or being able to exert a tremendous amount of force where it's needed. And it's very important nowadays in reassuring our partners and also in thinking about the future of naval warfare. I know that there have been discussions in France, and I will be interested to know if there have been also discussions in Italy and in the UK about, is the carrier strike group still useful in the 21st century? There were comparisons about, is the aircraft carrier the same as what the battleship was at the end of World War I? Is it still a relevant tool? And from our perspective, from the Navy perspective, but the strategic studies perspective, we think in France that it's still very useful, it's still very relevant, because it's able to exert this area of hyper superiority from the sea, but as Sean, you mentioned in your question, in all domains. And that's very useful because it's data-centric, it has the ability to gather large sources of intelligence, it has the ability to shorten the ODA loop in order to produce these strategic effects. But it's from a French perspective, because we're having a very specific carrier strike group. That is also, I know that in the room, just the other room, the André Beauf, there is a panel about deterrence. Our carrier strike group, the aircrafts from the Charles de Gaulle, are participating the French deterrence because they can be equipped with nuclear weapons. And I'm very interested to have the view on my colleagues, because their carrier strike group are slightly different. So do you think also that the carrier strike group is really at this strategic level from your perspective, or is it different from your side? Francesco, I'm starting with you.
Good morning. Bonjour à tout le monde. Je suis heureux d'être ici. C'est un honneur pour moi d'être ici, but I switch on to English in this moment. I agree with you, Nicolas, and I want to highlight the different capabilities of our carrier strike groups, in particular about the nuclear capabilities. The Italian Navy hasn't nuclear weapons, hasn't nuclear deterrence capabilities, and so for us the carrier strike group is a tool for conventional deterrence in particular. Conventional deterrence in a very wide spectrum of possibilities and capabilities. And carrier strike group is still, in this moment, essential and a central component of naval warfare for mobility, mass, and firepower. We don't have other tools of naval warfare able to generate these consequences. But we need to be honest and to recognize that the carrier strike groups today have a lot of threats. New threats represented by the diffusion of hypersonic missiles, anti-ship cruise missiles, and swarms of drones, for example. These threats are very relevant not only for our carrier strike group, but also for the US carrier strike group, for example. And we need to cooperate in the management of these new threats. This is my opinion, not the opinion of the Italian Navy, but I think that Admiral Beruti Bargotto agree about that. And I think we need to improve our capability to deter our adversaries in the use of these new threats. And I think that is important for us to sharing information, to share capabilities, to share training activities. And so I want to highlight that Italian Navy is very present, is always present in support to the European and NATO allies, from the Northern Sea and from the Baltic Sea until the Mediterranean on the southeast portion of the Indian Ocean and the Arabian Sea. Here, it is very interesting to think to the possibility to share nuclear deterrence capabilities. This is a very interesting proposal by French government, but I think that this proposal can be managed in a very wide perspective, in a wider perspective about a new type of conventional and not only nuclear deterrence ensured by European countries.
Thank you. I won't try to change languages mid-sentence. I'll just stick to English. Thank you for the questions, and it's great to be here, and it's great to be. I think what I'm about to say is relevant to the Admiral's question as well. It's great to be working again with Nicola and Francesco, because we are examples of deepening cooperation, because we have worked for our respective countries, our respective navies, and we've worked together on strategic issues and critical thinking. So there are a number of ways that we can work together and deepen that cooperation to make European carriers more than the sum of their parts, and I think that's important. I'd like to say, in response to the Admiral's question, how do we, and Sean, of course, your question, how do we deepen this? I'd like to think of it on perhaps 3 different levels: political, military or naval, and then industrial. There is we sometimes think, and sometimes certainly from across the Atlantic, a challenge is thrown at Europe, and Europe is considered to be a single entity. Europe is not a single entity. Europe is a continent. It has a lot of different countries in it, with different strategic outlooks and different priorities. And sometimes we may talk as if the view from London and Paris and Rome is a single view, and it won't be. But what it will be is, what those views will be, is overlapping, and so there will be some coherence to the picture that we paint and the activities that we undertake. And so it isn't a question of should there be a European carrier in the Indo-Pacific, for example. There will be a European carrier in the Indo-Pacific probably every year. The only question is which flag will be on it, and that flag will change as the cooperation deepens, and that's what's happened in recent years. But I think if we start at the political level, that will drive everything. Our 3 countries are at different stages of their political cycles. We have governments of slightly different political persuasions, but we have common interests, and so the drive at the political level to work together will filter through to the military level, and I think we are examples of that. We can operate together. We use NATO tactics, techniques, and procedures. We have systems that talk to each other, and I think that cooperation is very solid. And then we get to the industrial level, and that, of course, is challenging. There are commercial interests at play. There are different commercial defense companies that based in each of our countries that will need to make profits and need to make money, and they also need to work together so that the whole complex operates more smoothly. So I'd pitch it like that. Let's think politics, military, and industry, and get those working together, and we can succeed in carrier strike and other domains.
Thank you very much for the response. I'd like to turn now to the challenges of projecting European waters from the high north to the Mediterranean. Dr. Zampieri, what do you see as the priority threats across the region? Which threats do you see as either underestimated or still emerging? And for the larger group, where is there shared understanding, and where do national priorities and perspectives diverge, if at all?
I will present only an academic point of view. But firstly, I want to highlight that Italy is currently deploying warships simultaneously across multiple theaters. We have ships in the Arctic for scientific researches, for example, but also for Cold Response 2026, and with Nave San Giusto, with Venezia Battalion, and in the 1st Regiment of San Marco Marines Brigade. We have ships in the Mediterranean, Central and Eastern Mediterranean. We have ships in the Red Sea for Atalanta and Aspides, and we have ships in the Atlantic in this moment, in the Alpino Frigate, engaged in composite training unit exercise with the United States Navy. So it is evident that our first area of interest is the Mediterranean, the wider Mediterranean, and more focused, our attention is more focused on the Gulf of Guinea. The wider Mediterranean is very wide, from the Gulf of Guinea through the geographical Mediterranean to Red Sea, Arabian Sea, Persian Gulf too, until the Mozambique at south. It's a very wide area, very relevant for our interest, in particular our energetic interest, national interest, and this area is central for our security and for our stability and for security of Europe too, in my opinion. So we need to manage some challenges in this area, not only represented by the war between Iran and Israel and the United States, but also threats represented by the instability in the southern portion of the Mediterranean. Libya, for example, but also the acquisition of new military capabilities by Algeria. Algeria in this moment is acquiring 5th generation aircrafts from Russia, and Algeria is a very important ally for Russia. We need to manage challenges represented by the posture of Turkey. Turkey is a NATO partner, is a NATO ally, is a NATO country, but we have the need to manage challenges in the Mediterranean between Turkey and Cyprus, between Turkey and Greece, and between Turkey and Israel too. I hope that it will be very relevant in the near future to manage these threats. And for us, it is relevant not only to protect our energetic flows, but also to manage the challenge represented by flow of migrants, for example. And we are expecting a new increase of migration in a near future from the Northern Africa and from the Eastern Mediterranean too. And it is urgent for us, and in my opinion, this can be represent a field of cooperation among us. We need to protect critical infrastructures, not only pipeline for gas and oil, not only fiber optical cables, but also harbors, ports, and in our case, the plants for regasification. We are very dependent by the regasification in this moment. For us, it is very important to protect them. And I think that the sharing information, the cooperation exercise, and the industrial cooperation, maybe the most challenging condition in this moment, is very relevant if we want to improve our capability to protect ourselves and to protect our allies.
Do you want me or Kevin to oh, okay. Thanks, and thank you both of you also for the answer for the previous question. I'm going to build a little bit on your answer on the first question to answer this. Sorry, I'm French. I'm never respecting the questions. What you said, both of you, was very interesting in this perspective of protecting Europe and beyond Europe. Because on what you mentioned, Francesco, for example, in terms of creating a conventional deterrence or combining conventional nuclear deterrence at sea. And the issue of carrier strike group is very interesting because when you're having a French warship into an Italian or UK CSG or an Italian frigate or a British submarine within the French carrier strike group, you're generating some kind of deterrence because if a competitor decides to attack, this carrier strike group is not attacking only the UK, only Italy, only France, is attacking every country that's gathered inside. And that's why also it's very important to have not only the three of us participating in these operations, but also our friends and allies from the Netherlands, from Greece, from other NATO and European countries. That's a very important point. And in protecting Europe, it's very important also to show the competitors and the potential adversaries this solidarity and, you know, the embodiment of this solidarity through this common deployment, through these common CSGs. And that solidarity is not at the political or at the diplomatic level only, it's also at the military level and the very operational level. And these common deployments and this ability to integrate warships, submarines, aircraft carriers into a single multinational, whether flag on NATO or the EU or well, anything we can think about, is very important because this is demonstrating the solidarity, this is creating the deterrence. And Kevin, I think also it was very important to want you discuss about the industrial issue. I think that for all of us and for all NATO European allies, let's say it that way, because the US Navy, of course, Sean, you know this very well, is on a different scale. We need to go now, we achieved, more or less, let's say we achieved interoperability. And we need now to go beyond and to go to interchangeability, to go to the next step. And this will create also a better European security because if our capabilities are interchangeable, we can switch very easily having British, Italian, Dutch, Spanish, etc. ship capability, missile, MRO capability in order to work all together in order to maintain the level of European security we need. And as you mentioned, Francesco, regarding European security, the problem is that European security nowadays is from a geographical perspective, the high north, northern Atlantic, the Mediterranean, etc. that we all know. It's very classical in terms of naval strategic thinking, but also in a vertical way, because it's from seabed to space. You mentioned critical infrastructure. We have the over-the-sea critical infrastructure, the wind turbines, the regasification plant, etc., etc. But this is also extending up to the seabed. And when you're thinking about the waters around Europe, okay, in the Baltic, average depth is 80 meters. But in Mediterranean, average depth in 1,500 meters. In the Northern Atlantic is 3,300 meters. It's meaning also that we have to work all together in developing these new capabilities and the doctrines and the strategies that are going with them in order to be able to exert defense and maritime security in these geographical areas and in each of these geographical areas from seabed to space. What a challenge.
The problem with being the third person speaking each time is, well, the good thing is you have longer to think, and the bad thing is they have said everything you want to say. So I agree with my colleagues. I think from a UK perspective, a UK maritime perspective, we have what I'm going to say will be contradictory. Because the UK is always has been a global nation. It has responsibilities around the world. It has overseas territories. It has bases in different parts of the world. And we feel as a country, we need to be present in the Indo-Pacific, in the Mediterranean, in the South Atlantic, in the Caribbean, for different reasons. At the same time, we have made a strategic choice. And the strategic choice has been based on the threat. And the greatest threat that the UK identifies comes from Russia. And the geographical area most relevant for that threat is the Euro-Atlantic. So the North Atlantic, the Arctic, and the High North. So the UK is trying to maintain a thin maritime presence globally, but concentrate its forces in what is often in the UK called the EA2, Euro-Atlantic and Arctic. So that may be a little bit contradictory because we're trying to do two things. And geographically, strategically, as my colleagues have both said, we see a continuity from the High North all the way around, old maps like arcs of crises and so on, that goes through the Mediterranean, North Africa, Middle East, and into the Indo-Pacific. So by cooperating and by having countries and navies and forces that have overlapping strategic outlooks and overlapping geographies, that should make the job easier if we can coordinate. In terms of threats that we identify, again, the UK it has been at a crossroads. Everyone has been at a crossroads. So, do you focus on the most dangerous threat, the most dangerous course of action, which we would see, short of nuclear war, we would see as peer-on-peer war, probably against Russia, and probably in the areas that I've mentioned. And so the UK, the Royal Navy, at the moment is focusing on readying its forces for such an eventuality within the next few years, if need be. So to act as, not to go to war, but to act as a deterrent and fight if necessary. At the same time, the most likely threat may be something different. And there is an argument to say that we are coming under attack every day, every week, in the most obvious and most likely areas. And that is against critical infrastructure, in particular in our domain, under the sea. And so subsea infrastructure is an area that we need to focus on, and it is challenging. And if we go back to the point of cooperation with industry, when we talk about subsea infrastructure, and could I just say as well that that the UK learned much from France in this, because France, I believe, was the first to have a subsea strategy, which is a great piece of work, and we plagiarized, copied, worked along those lines from seabed to space. But when you think of industrial cooperation and public-private partnerships in the subsea domain, it's not the same as dealing with major defense companies that have huge factories and build ships and aircraft and so on. We're talking about media companies, technology companies, pipeline companies, energy companies. And if we are trying to protect our infrastructure because our societies depend on it, the question is who is responsible? Because the infrastructure does not belong to the state. It belongs to private companies. The commodities that flow through that infrastructure, be it data or energy, does not belong to the state. Mainly, it belongs to private companies or private individuals. And they are not the companies or the individuals that own the means, the pipelines and the cables. So who works, who protects? How do you coordinate nationally or internationally? I have not used the word, I don't think I have, critical national infrastructure, because it is not national. It is critical international infrastructure. So for the UK, so for data flows from North America to Europe, and most of those, many of those go through US or Canadian waters, the high seas, Irish waters, UK waters, French waters, before they make landfall. How do you coordinate that when that data belongs to someone and the cable belongs to someone else? That is, it's a challenging task, and I think that is one area we need to be working on, and we are. I know all of our countries are doing that, but at the same time, keeping in the back of our minds that we're preparing for peer-on-peer conflict in the blue waters of the North Atlantic. So very, very different challenges.
Excuse me. Let me say another thing about the interchangeability. In my opinion, it is very important and it is very possible from an operational point of view, from a tactical point of view. For us and for the British too, the adoption of F-35 is an evidence of this possibility. But the elephant in the room is represented by the political level and by the industrial level, naturally. And I'm not sure that our industrial complex is ready to act and to think in a European perspective. The evidence is represented by the projects for the anti-missiles, anti-drones defense of Europe. We have two main projects about that. It is crazy in this moment to have two main projects. We need to coordinate the efforts. We need to share information and to develop maybe two lines of research, but one product, one final product. This is challenging for us at political level, for us, for the Europe, at the political level and at industrial level. So I agree with Kevin about the international character of the critical infrastructures. I agree completely with you. The pipelines directed from North Africa to Italy aren't an Italian interest, only an Italian interest. They are an European interest. It is very important. After the closure of a relationship with Russia, for example, our underwater center, national underwater pole in La Spezia, can represent a tool for the development of new shared capabilities and for new shared researches, for example, and for the acquisition of new tools. In this moment, Italian Navy is acquiring a new vessel for seabed warfare and for the protection of a critical underwater infrastructure. It is a solution very similar to the solution adopted by the Royal Navy, and so we can identify in this need a new type of collaboration, a new type of cooperation. And I think that is relevant also for France and for other countries in the Southern Europe. And about the threat represented by Russia, I think that is important in this moment to be very honest and very clear at the European level, because I'm not sure that in a near future all the European countries will agree about the threats represented by Russia. In this moment, I'm not sure about that, in particular at southeast in the Mediterranean.
Before moving on from the discussion of threat, I want to make sure that we at least touch on the naval perspectives on Ukraine. So for Dr. Zampieri, after more than 4 years of war in Ukraine, what naval lessons stand out the most clearly? And have there been any notable recent developments in the maritime domain that we should be thinking about?
Okay, thank you for the question. I think that the war in Ukraine and also the naval operation in the Red Sea too are very relevant for the analysis of the change in the naval warfare, in the naval operation. First of all, I want to highlight the relevance of drones, the proliferation of drones. It is self-evident. Autonomous vessels and systems need a service life sufficient to achieve specific goals, specific mission over a limited time, and this is very interested. And this change the procurement and the need of procurement in the Navy. We can build a lot of drones with very small expenditure, very little expenditure, and because drones are relatively inexpensive, and the relative low cost of drones can threaten also the biggest ships, such as aircraft carriers, such as cruisers or destroyers. Today we have cruisers, not only destroyers, and they can threaten merchant ships, merchant traffic too. So it is important immediately to identify defenses, valid defenses against drones. And the cooperation in this case can be very, very important. Maybe drones will be very relevant also for the defense of a carrier strike group. But not only for the defense of a carrier strike group, but also for the firepower of the carrier strike group. Because we need to be honest, in this moment, all the European carrier strike group as less armed or unarmed. This is more correct for the escort vessels, if we look to the escort vessels, in comparison with the carrier strike group of the United States Navy, for example. Another aspect is represented by the rate of fire and by the relevance of high power today. The war in the Black Sea and the cooperation in the Red Sea demonstrated the high cost of missiles and the need to develop the ability to reload at sea our VLS. This is my dream, to have provide very efficient tools for the reloading of VLS at sea. United States Navy is developing tools in this moment, and the French Navy too. Okay, it is the moment to share information with the French Navy about that. We have the same VLS system, we have the same munitions, we can share information, we can develop together a solution about that. And so we need to develop drones as arsenal ships. Arsenal ships represented by drones can be very useful for carrier strike group, for the defense of carrier strike group, and for the improvement of the firepower of a carrier strike group. And I think that we have another important lesson represented by the relevance of geography. This is very important and very relevant for Italy in the center of Mediterranean. In this moment, in my opinion, it is important to recognize the relevance of the geography for the protection of the Strait of Sicily and the connection between Eastern and Western Mediterranean. So maybe can be the moment to improve our capability to control the Strait of Sicily.
When we think of the war in Ukraine and the lesson, I think any war, we need to be careful about drawing lessons. We need to be mindful of the particular circumstance of that war. But there are a huge number of lessons that we can draw from Ukraine, and they are very similar to the ones, as Francesco has said, that we can draw from the Red Sea, and now also very similar lessons that we can draw from the maritime conflict ongoing in the Persian-Arabian Gulf as we speak. I think what each of those conflicts has shown is that states or non-state actors, entities without a traditional navy or without obvious naval capabilities or very limited naval capabilities can have an enormous effect. And that may be through drones or other means, and as Francesco has said. What does that mean to us? Geography is also important. The Black Sea is an enclosed sea with a choke point, with a strategic choke point. The Red Sea is an enclosed sea with two strategic choke points at each end. The Persian Gulf is an enclosed sea with a strategic choke point. So the lesson, so we need to, when we think about the lessons to be learned, we need to think about what those state and non-state actors are doing, what technology they are using, and the geography and the context that they're using them in, because those lessons may not be the same if we're thinking about fighting a blue water battle in the North Atlantic against a peer competitor, as I've tried to previously say. So we need to think in those terms. I think, on a general sense, all of those conflicts have reminded us, or should remind us, are the basics, the basic theories of naval warfare. We need to be thinking about things such as sea control and sea denial, and not be only seduced by technology and equipment and the next big thing that companies are trying to sell to our navies. What are we trying to achieve? It is what Ukraine, the Houthis in the Red Sea, and the Iranians have shown, is that sea denial against even the most capable navies in the world is very, very possible. And it's very difficult to counter and very expensive to counter with the systems that we have in place at the moment. Hence, we need to have a rethink about how we approach those problems. But if we think in terms of sea control and sea denial, I think we'll be on the right track.
Thank you, guys. Kevin, I fully understand what you were saying on the last question, being the last to speak. As you said, nearly everything. And of course, I do agree with you. The tyranny of geography is back now. And I just want to add something. Let's say I will have the unpopular opinion about the war in Ukraine. I'm trying to broaden a little bit the picture to discuss not only about what's happening at sea, but also what's happening on land. Of course, we're very focused on drones, and Francesco, as you mentioned, it's very important. It's very important to integrate this issue for the future of naval warfighting. Yet, I think that if we focus solely or mostly on drones, we're missing what's, on my perspective, a very important part is that the war in Ukraine is not about drones or not mostly about drones. It's about enablers. It's about the relationship you have between firepower and mobility. It's about the ability of the Ukrainian forces to shorten the ODA loop, especially on targeting. Being able to identify, track, target, and fire at your opponent, and especially in close sea or nearly close sea, is very important. And that's a lesson we have to think also about in terms of blue water navy and blue water future war fighting, because this issue on the relationship between firepower and mobility was this targeting cycle and shortening the targeting cycle in terms of enablers, so having a free access to space-based services, having a free access to an electromagnetic spectrum, and combining all of these elements at the service of a naval force. I think it's one of the most important things we're seeing. We're seeing because the Ukrainians are doing it. We're seeing because the Houthis did it. Also, what you had on October 2023 is more or less a multi-domain operation by a non-state actor using space services. Well, if we were thinking about this 10 years or 15 years ago, everybody would have agreed that, okay, it's not possible. Look, we, the most technologically advanced forces in the world, the Western forces, okay, was struggling to really achieve multi-domain operations. So it's impossible to have a non-state actor managing to achieve this kind of operation. They did. And tomorrow we have to be prepared that all of our opponents will be able to conduct in some way this kind of operation. So we have to think about, of course, as you mentioned, firepower effectors, but also enablers that are being more and more critical.
Okay, I agree with Kevin and its deep analysis about the lesson of the Ukraine war, Russian-Ukraine war in the Black Sea. I agree with you about the attention required when we analyze the relevance of this naval war. Yes, the Black Sea is a small sea, is an enclosed sea, but in this moment the drones' capability are improving very rapidly. And so I think that we need to be prepared to manage these threats, not only in the enclosed sea or in the choke points or in the narrow sea, but also in the vast areas of the oceans, and in particular in the Mediterraneans, such as our geographic Mediterranean, but also the South China Sea, Indonesian seas, and the Japanese Mediterranean. So for the Italian Navy is a very interesting, it is a very interesting perspective, and it will be the topic of the Trans-Regional Sea Power Symposium of the October 2026. It will be devoted to analysis of the global relevance of the regional seas, such as Mediterranean, for example. So in Ukraine, in this moment, are able to hit Russian merchant ships in the center of Mediterranean, very far from the Odessa, very far from the Ukrainian ports. And it is relevant, and it is, in my opinion, is urgent in this moment to manage this threat. Regarding the enablers, I agree completely with Nicolas. Can be the development of new enablers can be one of the elements for the developing of new cooperation among Europeans. We have the capabilities to develop autonomous enablers. We Europeans have these capabilities. It is important at the political level. It is the same question.
We have about 10 minutes before we transition to audience questions, and so I'll try to combine my last couple questions for the group. So Dr. Rollins, you mentioned the return to some of the strategic fundamentals of sea denial and sea control. And at the same time, with the lessons from Ukraine, with the prevalence of drone warfare, when the first Sea Lord, General Sir Jenkins was in Paris last month for the Paris Naval Conference, he spoke to us about the UK's hybrid fleet and how crewed systems and uncrewed systems would work together. How do you can you explain that concept to us a little bit, and then if the rest of us can, the rest of the panel can inform us of their countries' respective investments in that. And then how does that square with this return to the strategic fundamentals and even the resurgence of some what we would call old school naval tactics like convoy operations, mine warfare, and the possibility of amphibious operations?
Yeah, we're going full circle, aren't we? It's So let me take those in maybe in reverse order. The old school tactics, the old school things, are they really old school, or have they been there all the time? I think they've been there all the time. I'm going to do the boring academic thing and go back to basics again and say, when we think about maritime or naval warfare, what are we trying to achieve? And broadly, we're trying to achieve the movement of something over, under, or through the sea, or stop someone else moving it. And there are a range of ways of doing that. And it's probably easier to try to stop something moving than it is to keep it moving yourself. And that's where drones, mines, improvised devices, everything comes in. I think it is then the response to those threats, which always and for millennia has evolved over time as political alliances change, as threats evolve, as technologies evolve to deal with them, that we can then come back and say, okay, there is something, we're moving to something slightly different, but it's an evolution rather than a revolution. I think it's moving on the same trajectory. So when we talk about a hybrid navy, some of the concepts in a hybrid navy, of course, go back thousands of years. So fire ships, the ability to have one, we might call it today a mothership with smaller vessels that operate around it. Years ago, we may have called that a task group or a task force with a capital ship, with escorts, and so on. And as the centuries and the centuries have passed, and as decades have passed in more recently, the number of people on board our platforms has reduced. there are fewer people on board an aircraft carrier today than there were on an aircraft carrier 20 years ago or 40 or 50 years ago. The fact that some of our platforms now and in future will have no people on board at all is just the logical next step. So when we talk about a hybrid navy, we're talking about a distributed system with a mixture of crewed and uncrewed platforms, of we might say not having all eggs in one basket, having risk spread amongst the group, the platforms, the units, the task force, however we want to describe it. But all of those points being networked in such a way that they can actively and proactively work together. So it's just an evolution of naval thought, and there needs to be, in going down that road, there needs to be an acceptance or an understanding of the level of risk that you are prepared to take. Because I think we had got to a stage, all of our navies had got to a stage where our tolerance of risk was very low. Technological, financial, risk to life, risk to operations. And I think by going into this hybrid world of crewed and uncrewed systems, some will work, some will not work, some will be expensive, some will be cheap. We need to take risk in all of those things, because what we're trying to do in that is return to mass over single, very expensive platforms.
Thank you, Kevin. Warfare is ironic by nature, because if you forget the lessons of strategy and the lessons of the past, you're doomed to fail. What's very interesting now, if you're looking at an old speech of Winston Churchill that was by the time the First Sea Lord, not the First Sea Lord as the commanding officer of the Royal Navy, but at the time the First Sea Lord as the Minister of the Sea, called Naval Estimates in March 1912. He was asking the House of Commons more funding to develop the Royal Navy, and in order to achieve his goal, he made a very long and very interesting speech about naval strategy. And I think that in 2026, you will not change a word of this 1912 speech. And in the same time, if you're looking at the works of not the only, but the most famous French strategist, Admiral Raoul Castex, who wrote barely at the same time of the Winston Churchill speech, the eve of the 20th century, wrote a book called La liaison des armes sur mer, in which he explained that what is considered outdated naval capabilities, outdated naval warfare elements, sometimes became, again, an important feature. And in his book, it was the fire ship. That's the example. When you're looking at what's happening today, Sean, you mentioned it, what do we have? Mine warfare, convoys, potentially the return of amphibious assault. We did not have any amphibious assault since the middle of the 20th century. Fire ships, modern fire ships, and also the return of the strategic importance of the cannon in warship, in counter-drone warfare, but not only counter-drone warfare. That's why it's very ironic. If you think that an equipment, or if you think of a way of waging war at sea is outdated, the problem is that it will come back again in another form, in an updated form, but it will come back again. So that's why thinking in terms of critical thinking, in terms of strategic thinking, in terms of return of experience is so important in naval warfare, because we're still discovering that what have been considered unuseful or outdated is, on the contrary, on certain situations, very useful. And the very real example you're having today, at least in the Black Sea, is the mine. Naval mines today are one of the most important features on what's happening in the Black Sea and potentially on what may happen in the Persian Gulf. It's cheap, very efficient, very simple to produce, and having very important military and strategic effects.
Can I say? Okay. Just remarks about that. I think that all the naval warfare today is so important and so challenging because the battle space is deeply changed. And the battle space of today is decisively more extensive, more complex, more transparent, more lethal, and more accelerated and more contested. So all types of naval warfare in this context are very, very, very challenging. If you think to the hybridization of Navy, we can identify an evidence about that. If we talk about the hybridization of navies, and in particular the possibility to contest the sea control with the hybridization of the Navy, it is a nightmare. If we think to the new types of armed merchant ships of China, it is evident. It is evident the relevance of the hybridization of the Navy. And so it is essential to develop new answers and to improve, in particular, our geographical intelligence. We need to monitor the seas. We need to monitor the maritime spaces. We need to monitor the merchant traffic. Why? Because we don't know if the merchant ship is a real merchant ship or is a military ships or militarized ships. This is one of the most important aspects. And secondly, we need to develop new technologies to share informations about the knowledge of the evolution of merchant vessels in the adversary's country. I think that is relevant, the actual situation in the Mediterranean represented by the Russian merchant ships. Russia in this moment is considering the possibility to militarize its tankers and the tankers of the Shadow Fleet. And it is very important for us to control the evolution of the naval strategy and naval doctrine about that. And the last but not least, mines. Mines are my nightmare, are the nightmare of all the navies. We can say, damn the mines. It is impossible. Mines are the weapons that wait. And so it is important to improve our knowledge about that. The European navies has a long experience, an historic experience in the mine warfare. I think to the Belgian and Dutch experience, they are very relevant in the naval mine warfare. And so we need to increase our knowledge about the new possibility represented by the mine warfare and develop new systems.
Please join me in thanking our panelists, Dr. Mizuki, Dr. Zimpieri, and Dr. Rollins. Thank you very much for your insights. Merci beaucoup.